trick tonight, Mr. Ryland. Let's see. There we go. Kind of tricky a little bit. It's a little different for us. We have done this so many different ways, you know?
Sorry.
Here we go.
That's
there was
better.
some echo cancellation. Let's see if that's better. And everybody, if you're getting on and you want to help us about this, we're trying a new trick tonight, Mr. Ryland. Let's see. Okay. Here we go. There was some echo cancellation. Let's see if that's better.
Oh, hey, maybe I need to put headphones on.
Oh, I think it's okay right now. Hold on a second. Just a second.
Oh, hey, maybe I need to put headphones
on. Oh, no, that's just fine. That's good. We're good the way we are.
Okay. All right, good. So are people, I can't see like comments or anything. I don't know who's watching.
Oh, you can't see any of that tonight. Okay, I can. And Brent is with us. Barbara Pittman and Stephanie McCrory are there with us. And we'll see who else joins us in the next moment or so. And, you know, Ryland, it might not be the worst idea. Do you have a tablet or your computer or something close that you could, like, put on Facebook?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you could see comments on that. I mean, that would at least be something.
That's a good idea.
That would be.
Now I got to remember how to sign into Facebook.
These are the kinds of technical issues that literally come up all the time with Zoom. The Calvins are there. Hello, Jenny Calvin.
Hey.
And David Calvin, I assume. Unless there's other Calvins there.
Oh.
Yes, I thought that was true, Miss Stephanie. That Vicky must be with you, or I knew who you were. That's Vicky Barker's daughter, which is Betty's niece. Okay, so that's who Stephanie is. If you don't know Ryland, or the rest of you guys, everyone.
Well, I'm not. I don't know any of this because I'm not on yet. Hold on.
Okay. All right.
That was a loud ding.
What?
Your son?
I don't even think. Was that you or me? Was that me?
I think that was you.
Oh, that was a text. Oh, that was a text message that I was getting. So, but that's okay.
Very professional tonight, Steve.
You're right. Your lighting looks really good. I'm a little grayer here. I need to get some more. Change my lighting a little bit or something. And then you have this nice background. You have a little bit of my background in the picture too, which is.
I like your shelf. You got a shelf up there with some pictures on it.
We got this pewter thing here. If we wanted to put some water in that, we could do that, I guess, or make coffee in it. Got some pictures. This has been my chair during much of our like remote working kind of stuff for the year. So I got this picture of Mike and Izzy that I really like there. And let's see what else.
I remember that day.
There's a great picture of Lucy. We don't have a good picture of Deacon up here. We've got a picture of our wedding party. So that was our wedding party there. So
are all those things? Oh, okay. Never mind.
Well, it's people.
Yeah. No, I looked away and I looked back and I saw the shelf and I thought you just ripped it off the wall.
No.
I was like, did you glue all those pictures to that shelf and rip it off the wall? What's going on?
That was a terrible conclusion. That is absolutely.
Yep. That's how my mind works. I'm looking for. All right, Cedar Lane Facebook page.
I wonder if I can adjust this a little bit. What happens if I do this? That'll fill this up. It makes this a little bit bigger. Let's do that some more. Okay, guys. So everyone, thank you for coming. We are so glad that you're joining us for this today.
Yeah, that's how my mind works. All right, hold on. I'm trying to turn it down. Mute. Mute.
All that stuff that happened 30 seconds ago, Rylan.
Mute. All right, it's muted.
So earlier when we were doing that, I was having to wait for your voice to come across because...
Thank you for coming. We are so glad that you're joining us. Okay.
Now you got it.
I can see the comments now. I see the Calvins.
And there should be some good ones now. There should be some really good comments now because we've got this
Joe and Linda.
Great live TV.
Well, there will be soon. Ooh, hickory smoked chicken.
I know that does sound good. That sounds really good. I haven't had dinner yet, so that sounds really good to me too. Okay, well, everybody, sorry, we're a little bit different tonight, and we've tried doing this in so many different ways. We just haven't tried this one yet, so we thought we would give it a go. So that Rylan and I could be a little more socially distant tonight, we're doing it this way. Okay, and Rylan, we should have done this last week while you were gone. Did you have a good vacation?
Yeah, we did. We had a great time. We went to Texas. We went to Cherie's to see Cherie's dad.
Like Houston area, is that right? Or
Austin.
Austin, okay.
Austin area, I think. And we swam in the pool all week. We went to SeaWorld and practiced a lot of social distancing at SeaWorld. We wore our masks.
I saw the picture of your family with the mask, but like the dolphin, in the picture.
Yes.
Great.
Oh, I wish I could put that up. I don't know if I can, but anyway, let's see. We had to wear masks. It was like 97 degrees outside, and we were wearing our masks, and that was unbearable. But yeah, we had a great time anyway.
Well, I love going to see. I think SeaWorld's really fun. I'm really like amusement parks. Like I'm really campy. But like whatever, man. Just go for it.
You would have loved it because there were some rides where you could just stay on the roller coaster and not get off. If you wanted.
Awesome. That's awesome.
It was no lines. It was great.
So, Rylan, last week we talked about Constantine, Emperor Constantine, and what
I know I watched it.
You did watch it? Good.
You know what? You know what I did? I watched it at 1.5 speed. It was great.
Everybody watching this is like, wait, we can do that?
Yeah. Well, you can't do it live. So that would be a good trick. But amazing. You know how like in podcasts when you do 1.5 speed, it like lowers the tenor of your voice to match like your average tenor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think it does that when you're watching a video.
On the video,
so it was a lot of fun.
Well, okay, so I'm glad you watched. So if you're joining us this week out there in Facebook or YouTube land, and you missed last week, we talked about what happened in Christianity, in Christian history, when all of a sudden, like, we went legit, or when Christianity was kind of deemed an official possibility of religion for the Roman Emperor and Roman Empire, and they determined that they were not going to actively persecute the church, right? And that happened under a guy named Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, the early 300s, and that was a significant thing. That was a really significant moment in the life of the church, and in some ways, it created very much created new possibilities for the spread of the church, and it had this kind of legitimizing force for Christianity. But in other ways, it brought some negative things too, right? Like in many ways, Christianity became too comfortable with its relationship with the world. Okay, maybe became too posh and luxurious of a religion in many ways. I think we still struggle with this. We still struggle with our relationship to government and our relationship to, institutional secular things. And we want to have influence, and we want to have a way of making our world better through the powers that be. But at the same time, we don't want to become subservient to their agenda. We don't want to let just be used by the powers, and that tension is nothing new. I mean, it's been around since at least Constantine, if not before then. Okay, what I want to talk about today in our kind of moments, we're kind of looking at different moments in church history, and today I want us to look at something that was almost the other side of the coin, and indeed developed accelerated, certainly accelerated as a result of what was happening with the empire on the other side of things. Okay, and that is the move to the desert. Because just on one side, the church was kind of becoming legitimated in terms of like secular society, okay, in terms of culture and its relationship to culture, but in another sense, a really important sense, there were people that felt like for the first time it became a possibility to have a very social, like to be a Christian solely because of its social benefits, or because of this kind of, it gave you cultural clout or something like that, or like, like Constantine becomes a Christian. Well, all of a sudden, people start thinking, who want to have power and influence with the emperor, they say, well, if I'm buddy with the church, maybe I can have a little more clout with Constantine or with the emperors that follow him, right? And that really becomes an issue, that there becomes the possibility that Christians will have prestige because of their religion. They'll have prestige amongst their neighbors, and that it'll be a tool for them to get power and things like that, right? Well, one of the things that happens then is there, and it's not completely because of that, but I think it's related, is that you have Christians who decide that the cultural Christianity that exists is full of temptation, and it's lackadaisical, and it's too comfortable, right? And so what they do is they move out into the desert, and we have the beginning of what we call the monastic lifestyle, right? We have the first monks.
So the first monks moved out to the desert.
Well, we even call it, I don't know if we, yes, that's right.
Like in Africa?
Okay, so there's distinct movements. The two main distinct movements are in Egypt and in Syria. Okay, so
they live in caves and stuff, and like,
yeah,
live out in the middle of nowhere. Okay,
yeah, cool. For real, and
like Indiana Jones.
So there's a couple of movements we want to talk about here in the way this happens. All right, but before we get there, I want us to be really clear about why it's happening. All right. And in the beginning, it's happening because of, like, it really is an escape from the kind of cultural sinful pressures of like urban Christianity. Okay. And by urban, I mean like ancient urban, these cities, and there's just there's some of and these are mostly men at this point. Okay. There's some mothers as well too, but the literary tradition we have is, certainly favors the men there in terms of how many there were. But what happens is they basically throw their hands up and say, I've had too much of all the sinful stuff that surrounds me in the city. And so they would go out and they would find, so like one of the first ones is a guy named Anthony. Okay, and Anthony is because of this movement, he's a very, very important character in church history. And he's born in 250, so it's the late 300s. So this is actually before Constantine, okay? But he's going to live up until about 350, okay? So that's kind of the end of Nicaea, the Council of Nicaea, all that kind of stuff. Like, so his lifetime is 100 years. He lives to be 105 years old, and his lifetime spans from the beginning of like the presence of persecution to the end of his life. Like, Christianity has kind of taken this Constantinian leap. Okay, and so he really does, like, his life just has this enormous span of experience, particularly, and so much changed, particularly in the way that Christianity related to the culture at large, right? So I guess what I want to point to in Anthony's life is what he does at the beginning is he goes out and he he actually finds an old Roman fort, an abandoned military outpost. Okay, and this is in Egypt. He's in one of the Egyptian fathers. Okay, he has a relationship with people in the city of Alexandria. Although I don't think that's the city that he was from originally. Okay, but he's in some other city, and so he makes this move, and he decides, in order to basically purify his own soul, that he's going to take on. He actually he's listening in church. The story is that he's listening in church, and he hears the story of go sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. Right, like this thing that Jesus says in the Gospels, and he's like, okay. And he does. He sells everything he has, and he basically has nothing left, and he just and he gives away everything that he owned, and then he just moves out into the desert and basically devotes himself to a life of prayer. And he's completely isolated from other people, except for there's like a hole in the wall, and people begin like coming and like bringing him food. And so he's fasting most of them, but people will bring him food and they stick it through the hole in the wall, and in return he'll kind of give them advice, like they'll ask him spiritual questions. All right, and he's really kind of the first monk. Okay, now we call this sort of practices, we call it asceticism. Okay, like ASCETI. CISM, okay, ascetic. We talk about being an ascetic. What we mean is an ascetic practice is one that is denies your own flesh. Okay, it's things like fasting. Okay, that's an ascetic practices. And Anthony was an ascetic, but he was somebody that deprived himself of food. He went on long fasts. When this movement develops, so people see him and they say, man, that's the one. They come and take advice from him, and then there are other people that kind of do something similar. And so there are people that take on their own fasts. Okay, they take up their own. They're called cells. Their own little monastic habitats, and they'll do it. You're like you said. Some of them are in caves. Some of them are in little shacks. Okay, some of them are just in like they're very very sparse locations, and that's kind of the whole point, right? Like to completely deprive themselves as much as they can. And they do that with food. They also do it even with sleep. So for a while, like the practice becomes for these monks that they would sleep an hour a day.
Wow.
And they would eat one meal a day. Okay, and you have all these debates about like how much is too much or is healthy, and they're kind of aware of that. They're like, well, you can go so far that you become proud of your fast, and that can destroy your spiritual life too. Do
these guys write a lot? Do we have a lot of writings from them? And
okay,
or how do we know about them?
All right, we know about them partly because we are developing this kind of literary. We've talked about this a little bit. We have these like the beginnings of literary Christianity where people are passing on these things, right? And do you remember when we talked about the Nicene stuff that there's a bishop named Athanasius who he's a bishop around Alexandria that or becomes a bishop around Alexandria, and he's the main opponent of the heretic Arius, right? Like he's the one that is opposing him. Well, Athanasius he knows of Anthony, okay, and he actually writes a book called The Life of Anthony, all right, that becomes very very popular. Like a lot of people read it. But not only that, there also becomes there becomes a like these monks, the Desert Fathers that we call them the Desert Fathers or Mothers, Desert Fathers and Mothers. They become very well known for giving advice. Okay, and so there becomes a collection of their like proverbs. Okay, and that's a little tricky because they're not just proverbs because they usually have like a story around it. Okay, for instance, all right, so there's a story. There's a story that there was a monk that was very impressive to some of the other monks, right? And he came to visit Anthony, and Anthony sat and listened to him, and he wanted to know if like how proud this monk was, and so he insulted him. And he insulted, like he repeatedly insults the guy, okay, and the guy like gets his feelings really hurt, and so Anthony tells the other monks, I wanted to see how good he was at being insulted, because that's like a spiritual test. And I found out that he was like a city that was decorated, because when I insulted him and he responded poorly to it, I found out he was like a city, a beautifully decorated city that was rotting on the inside. I think is what he says, something like that, right? So it's not just the saying; it's like the whole story, like that. And this is a very, very common kind of form of that we have from these guys, is that there would be somebody would come for them. You actually know this form, like it's kind of the story of somebody coming to see the old wise man on top of a hill, and they kind of tell their problem, and he goes and sends them. Like there's another story, like Anthony. How did this go? Somebody came to visit Anthony, and he was standing outside of his cell, and he was relaxing with a couple of the other monks. And this guy, he's come to see this famously ascetic person, and he's like, "You're just out here chilling out, like you're relaxing and like telling jokes with these other monks. Like, what's going on?" He's like, "Well, I'm on my break." And he's like, "What? Monks shouldn't take breaks or something, And the guy and Anthony says. Well, he sees that the guy's a hunter, and so he has a bow and arrow with him. And he says, "Okay, pull your bow and shoot it," and he does. And he says, "Well, do it again." He does it again, and he has him just shooting these arrows like out into the desert, like over and over again. And eventually the guy says, "If my bow is always pulled tight, it'll break." And Anthony says, "So it is with a monk, and you have to learn to like give yourself moments of relief, or you won't be able to sustain the pressure that you put yourself under," right? And it's like it's these kind of they're really great. They're really wonderful stories. And so there are we have a lot of collections like that of things. And then some of the Desert Fathers, we actually have writings of them in particular, where they are giving instruction about what it means to live a life of prayer, and what it means to devote yourself to stuff. Okay, and I want to talk about a couple of things in that in a second. Does that help you with your question about where we know that some of this stuff from, though? We know some of it from their own pen, and then we know some other people like wrote and collected things about them.
Yeah, so it sounds like they isolated themselves, but then they like got together and like had monk parties or something.
Okay, so part of what happens is that Anthony realizes he's been out in the desert for 30 years or something like that, and he realizes that there are more and more people who want to take on this kind of lifestyle. Okay, and so you have this very important transition where he basically invites some other people to come join him in a community. Okay, and so this is the first monastic community, and actually this is if we think about monks now. Okay, there's actually a difference. Like you know how sometimes you'll hear monks called monks, and sometimes they're called friars. You ever heard that difference? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Friar John.
Yeah, Friar Tuck.
Friar Tuck.
Whatever. Okay, so a friar technically now is a brother who's in one of the particular groups that has. Friar is just one of the maybe Latin. It's one of the. It means brother, okay? But a brother, those kinds of monks or brother monastic folks are people who are in part or they're in orders or divisions of monasticism that are organized into very, very small groups, like family-sized groups, like 5, 10, 12 at most. The big monks where there's like a couple of hundred of them that live together in a big monastery, that you kind of like those are monks proper, right? And they're actually many fewer of them. There are fewer of these kinds of monastic orders altogether. They're declining very rapidly, but they're still around. Anthony makes that move, and he basically invites people to be a part of this community, okay, and or he finds people who are trying to do it, and he joins them together, and he begins training them, and he begins kind of um, giving them guidelines and some rules, and that becomes developed over the next couple of 100 years. Okay, there becomes some very standard practices of how people do that. So they have certain hours of the day that they devote to prayer. They have certain hours of their day they devote to just like working, sustaining themselves. Okay, um, and that's a move that actually begins with Anthony, but over several 100 years is going to become more, um, I guess, more formalized. As these, and that's a turn. So you don't have the solitary monastic person like who just goes out and lives in the desert in a cave by himself. That doesn't happen very much after, say, 450, 500 BC or AD rather. Okay, that practice begins to kind of evaporate, and instead you have these monastic things. And the monastic things become really important. These big monastic communities become important because they become kind of storehouses of learning. Okay, they're important for training priests or whatnot, and they kind of disseminate. They actually function as priests sometimes in the communities that are around them. They're the copyists, so all of they have a huge role in preserving the Bible and getting it disseminated by making handwriting these copies out, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that with other forms of literature too. Okay, so this kind of spreading literature of Christianity is really housed in the monasteries in large way. So they have those kinds of functions, but they also have, some of them are dedicated specifically to some of those things, and that's their work. Like your job is copyist, okay, but sometimes their job is making honey or growing wheat or whatever, and they just support themselves as well as they can. Okay.
I heard they would write things in the margins about each other.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
of their notes when they're copying the Bible or whatever.
Yeah.
Like
brother so and so smells bad, or
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's some of that kind of stuff that happens.
Silly guys.
Just people,
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit and let's talk about some of the kind of driving things that happen as a part of this. Remember, part of what's happening is that they are kind of they're driven to the desert as much for what they're avoiding as for what they're reaching for. Okay, the avoidance of sin and kind of this purification of their faith is a really important thing. And so when you look at the literature of the Desert Fathers, and I'll tell everybody, hey, everybody, if you're done, when you get done with this whole thing, or tonight, and if you just search the sayings of the Desert Fathers, okay, you can easily find a PDF version of this stuff in English. I mean, there's this stuff has been around for a long time, right? And there's a collection of sayings that's been around since 600, AD. So I mean, there's some really established things. But anyway, if you look through these things, you'll start seeing several themes develop. One of them is, as you would expect from the things that drove them to the desert in the first place, they're very aware of the presence of evil in the world and of sin. And in particular, they are very aware of the presence of demonic forces and the work of Satan in the world. Okay? And so because they go out in the desert to get away from sin, and you know what they find when they go out in the desert? Sin.
Yeah. It's there too.
Yeah, it's there too because they're there, right? They take it with them, right? And they have traded certain temptations for other temptations, right? And they find that they have to kind of deal with that. And so there's a lot of writing. A lot of the writing they do is like giving advice to other people pursuing, this kind of life of prayer. And they say, hey, you need to be aware of the presence of demons that are going to tempt you, for different stuff. And that's one of the lessons of the Desert Fathers, I think, is that even for people who are taking their spiritual life like uber seriously, like super seriously, right? There still is the presence of darkness and sin and corruption, and even and really legitimately, like demons are at work in the world. There is a story. Oh man, trying to remember where this one comes from. Um, one of them tells a story about the devil. Okay, and the devil, and the story goes that the devil says he's throwing a devil awards banquet basically, and so these demons come and report what they've been doing. It kind of sounds like some Screwtape Letters or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was about to say that.
Yeah, and one of them comes and says something to the effect of, I spent, I went to a town and there was a festival there, and I created like drunken carousing, and everybody was really, and he says like, by the end of the night, I was able to, create evil in these different ways. They were sinning and they're, lusting after each other or whatever, all this stuff, right? And he says, well, the devil is like, well, how long did it take you? And he said, well, it took me 10 days to do that. I was in there like, working on this for 10 days. And he's like, oh, you're wasting your time. That's too inefficient. Right. And then there was somewhere else that he goes somewhere else. Another demon comes and he says like, I incited a whole, village to go to war with another village, and they were murdering each other and killing each other and all this stuff. And the devil's like, that's great, it's really good. Good, or evil, I guess. It's really evil.
It's really bad.
It's really bad. Yeah, that gets confusing, right? Yeah. But the devil's congratulating him and is going to reward him, and says, how long were you there? And he's like, well, it took me 30 days to do that. He's like, oh, you're too frivolous with your time. And the devil kind of, and then there's another demon, of course. A third one comes because it's a kind of a preacher story, right? Mm-hmm. A desert father story. And this demon says, I was able to I went to tempt a desert father. I went to tempt a father in the wilderness, a hermit, and I was able to one night I was able to get him to have like lustful thoughts. That's all he says. It's just one time. One time I was successful. He had like a lustful thought, and the devil's like, okay, well, how long did it take you? He said, I tempted him for 30 years, and then I finally had that success. And the devil says, that's amazing use of time, and takes and gives him his like crown and says, come sit next to me at this banquet, right? And the point being that if there's several points to a story, right? Like that's why they do this in stories, like this wonderful layers of meaning. And part of the layer of meaning there is that first of all, sin's out there in the desert, but also like they had to be, they encountered like constant temptation, and felt like one of the most important things they had to do was like be vigilant about it. Mm-hmm. And some of the desert fathers, when they talk about like the demons that are tempting them, they're almost like very personal. I mean, they really, it's like they know them because they're just super attentive to that part of their life, And I think that's something that we're just too. People are either like only think of demons at like Halloween and think of them as like pointy-eared little things, or they think of them as being real, but only doing like exorcist kind of stuff, right? Like they're only, I don't know, gonna make people's heads spin around or stuff like that,
haunt your house and stuff.
Yeah.
Or slap the shelves.
Or like they're just you feel like a creepy presence, and they're gonna make you, you know what I mean, like that kind of stuff. And really, like, I really genuinely believe in like demonic work in our world. I just think most of it happens through like the subtle forces of temptation, where people decide it's okay to tell a lie, or they decide it's okay to hurt somebody, or
That's kind of what the Screwtape Letters are about, right?
Yeah.
That concept. If y'all haven't read that, that's a great book by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, and I think Lewis is onto something there, because he's saying, this stuff, we don't really think of it as being demonic, but there really is like Lewis believes in the reality of demonic work in the world, and that's part of the genius of the letters. But it's also one of the real realizations of the of the Desert Fathers, right? Because their attention is turned away. Like exorcism and that kind of stuff is different. They're not experiencing. They do see some of that too, but what they really sense is the tempting presence of demons, right? And they really bring that to the front. Jenny, Seeing the Unseen is amazing. That's a really remarkable book.
Yeah, I think you let me borrow that.
I did.
I think maybe. Do you have that?
I guess not anymore. I don't know. I've had it. I have had it. I don't know.
Maybe it's a different book.
Maybe I don't know.
But is it the one about the guy who was an exorcist?
Oh no, that's Scott Peck. The Powers. That's called. I can't remember what the name of. Oh, The People of the Lie is the name of that book. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That's a great book.
That's what I was thinking of, I guess.
That's a great book too. But anyway, so that's one of this whole demonic stuff like that. That's one of the things I think we really need to take seriously. The presence of demonic forces in our world. Satan is at work, and we can be much more vigilant about the way that Satan is trying to tempt us. You know, in my own personal prayer practice, I say the Lord's Prayer every day, right? And I always think about that part of one of the things that Jesus instructed his disciples to pray about was that they would not be led into temptation, but that he would deliver them from the evil one, right? As we say evil or the evil one, either way. I'm sure that's a reference to Satan's work, right? Jesus himself is tempted by Satan, and he's telling his disciples, you need to be vigilant about being tempted you need to pray to God that God will help you in your moment of temptation, right? And that you won't be delivered into evil. So that's really significant. And that's a real important theme, not just for Anthony, but for the later, for many of the Desert Fathers. That's something that you read. Another thing that you see is that they're the way they take seriously the body and its relationship to spirituality. Okay, and I kind of feel a little weird about this one because on one hand, we know that ascetic practices can be abusive, and people can kind of take them, and Jesus talks about the Pharisees like that, right? You need to be careful about the way that you do your fast and not doing it so that everybody else sees you and you become proud of it. And but at the same time, we seem to think that our faith is just something that happens between our ears. And I don't know that we take as seriously the way that our bodies are engaged in our spirituality. And that's, I don't, that doesn't just mean the fasting part. That's part of it. Okay, that's part of it. But what I mean, go ahead.
Well, we've talked about this before, like prayer posture.
Yeah.
Are you down on your knees, or is it the kind of prayer where you stand up and raise your hands, or, your body can be involved in the worship as well, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And part of the practice of prayer, and for many of them, part of their practice of prayer becomes kind of experimenting with that a little bit and understanding what it meant to pray with their bodies. And they're doing that in a really radical way, right? They're only sleeping an hour a day, and there's stuff about they believe not that you shouldn't sit down in a chair, but that you should lean on your side against the building. That's not this as much as you could don't sit down, which is some really kind of crazy stuff. But in a way, they're even the physical withdrawing themselves from the city and putting themselves in the desert, that's about your body, right? It's about how your body is engaged with the stuff that your faith is doing, and that just seems so. To me, that whole concept is very, very, very profound, and to think about if I'm practicing my faith, it ought to be visible in some way. Not that it's all external, You know, we don't want it to be all external. We want to caution ourselves about it becoming too external.
Mm-hmm.
But there ought to be something like my body should do some different things. My body should be in some different places. Okay? I should exercise certain kinds of control over my body because of my faith. Like if my faith does not affect my body at all, you know, what's going on? You know, I think that's worth. I think one of the questions that we can seriously ask is what difference does our faith make to our physical bodies? Um, so that's another layer of something I think we can learn from the Desert Fathers. And the third thing I would just want to layer say, it's just real simple and obvious, but how devoted they are to connecting with God in prayer is instructive to us. You know, obviously, not everybody that went out to the desert, like they're, you know, once the monastic communities start up, there are certain people that just kind of go because they think, well, that's as good a way of making your life as any other, right? And there's corruption within the monasteries that kind of becomes a thing, you know, later too. But man, I gotta respect somebody that just says, I'm going to spend the entirety of my life trying to connect with God in prayer. I'm just going to be completely devoted to that. I really, when we think about what's happening in the church right now, I think one of our greatest needs across the landscape of Christianity is a fuller pursuit of prayer. You know, just be devoted to that. And I'm not saying we all need to like pack up everything and go live out somewhere in the middle of the desert where we don't need to talk to anybody anymore. And I don't know that, you know, some of the things that they do where they're like only sleeping an hour a day and leaning up against a wall for the entirety of the day or the night. I mean that's there's something too much there. Okay, but how dare we say, you know, we don't really have like the, you know, 20 minutes a day to spend a little quiet time with God, right? Like, you know, how dare we? And when people really like devoted, we have this great witness of people who devoted their life to connecting with God. And I think it's an inspiration to kind of call us to more fully do that. Yeah, Dave. So Dave asked this question: do you think we have overreacted to Jesus' caution to not do our acts to be seen by men? Dave, yeah, yeah. So what Jesus says there is hyperbolic, right? It's almost like you can't outdo what Jesus says. Like he's like, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, right? But you're right. Like there is this sense that we say. Jesus says, don't do your pray in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, don't do your praying or your giving, your almsgiving, or your fasting. Don't do those three things he mentions. Right? Don't do those three things to be seen by other people, and because if you do them, you have your reward. Right? And I do think there is a sense that like because here's what I think, Dave. I don't know that we've overreaction. What I think we've done though is I think we have made those things entirely private. I don't think that's what Jesus is necessarily going for, right? Like there's something about almsgiving that is an interaction with other people, right? Um, there is a way of there is a fasting that means pushing away from a feast that you're invited to, you know, or something like that, right? There's a way of practicing prayer in our common life together as disciples. When we make things into too private, we kind of isolate them from our bodies. Yeah, because we think of what the ultimate private space is what happens in here, right? So yeah, I do. I don't know if I would say overreaction or I'd just say distortion of what Jesus says, but I think we kind of insulate ourselves from the accountability of what happens with our bodies in public too, right?
It makes it easier sometimes not to do those things too, because they're private, right? And
Absolutely.
so there's not accountability.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, we kind of make that jump from I don't have to do this to be seen by other people to I just don't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's just. And
I mean, that's the safest thing. No one will see you if you don't do it.
And Jesus clearly anticipates that just like his disciples will pray, they will also practice almsgiving. They will practice that kind of generosity. They will practice fasting. It's a given for him that they should be doing those things. When you fast, right? Do not disfigure your face like the Pharisees do, but instead, put oil on your head. And I mean, this is the way Jesus talks about it. When you do this, do it this way.
Even in the Lord's Prayer, he says, "Give us this day our daily bread," right? So that's something that you're going to say with other people, or it doesn't make sense.
Oh yeah. Our Father. Yeah, the first word is ours. Yeah. So that's the deal with some of that. I think we have to be careful about that. The last thing I want to say, I mean, I've already said the last thing, but another thing I want to kind of add to this though is that we have this tension now because this is where we started, right? Constantine, faith is a very public thing. It becomes like this public, it becomes like too comfortable and all that kind of stuff. And then we have this way of like complete and total withdrawal. And for a long time, Christianity was really searching for the middle way. What does the way look like where we're engaged with society? We're not withdrawn into the desert. We're engaged with society, but we're not completely as enmeshed as like the emperor is. Right, and so finding that third way, and theologians will talk about the search for a third way, because you have the monastic, or the option, the desert option of withdrawal, and then you have the way of kind of being the right hand, on the right hand of the empire,
Yeah.
So what's the middle way? What's the way that the church remains engaged with society while also remaining independent from it? Okay, and
in the world, but not of the world.
Yeah,
one of those.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah. And I think there's a really tough balance, but I think we've got to find something there. We just got to find a way to do it. Mm-hmm. So. Okay. All right. Well, that's what I wanted to do. Do you have anything else you wanted to offer tonight, or?
No. I learned a lot about the church, the Desert Fathers, that I didn't know. So that was interesting. Yeah. I appreciate you doing the research for that. Yeah. I think people would like to have some references for some of the stuff we talk about. Oh, yeah. I know Paul Ritter, for one. Uh-oh. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Yeah.
Okay. So I had low battery thing. I thought it kicked me off. I think a few people, Paul sent us an email asking about some references. I don't know, other people might want the same thing. So if we want to post those later or something, that would be good for people.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you what, I will send out a link to the Desert Fathers for one thing. Okay. Because I think just so that you know the kind of things that they said, I think they're pretty, and sometimes they're funny. Sometimes they're really kind of entertaining to read at points. But that would be useful too. And then Paul was asking about some information about where you can kind of look up some of that creedal stuff, and so we'll send something out with that too. Okay. Everybody, thank you so much again for setting apart part of your Wednesday nights to join us. We really appreciate it. We're really glad to have this time with you guys. Okay. And we'll talk to you later. Okay. See you, Rye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.